In 2005, our Boy Scout troop set out for a weekend adventure in Utah's Uinta Mountains. We were a group of 10 boys, led by our dedicated scoutmaster, Mr. Harris. The mountains were beautiful and remote, offering us a perfect escape from everyday life. We spent the day hiking, exploring the lush trails, and learning about survival skills. The air was fresh, the skies clear, and the mood light. By evening, we set up our camp near a small creek, its gentle babble a soothing background to our activities. We gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the horizon. The first sign of trouble came with the wind. It picked up suddenly, rustling through the trees with an eerie intensity. The sky darkened rapidly, and an oppressive silence fell over the camp. We hurriedly secured our tents, sensing that a storm was approaching faster than we had anticipated. Within minutes, the heavens opened, and torrential rain began to pour down. The wind howled through the trees, bending them almost to breaking point. Lightning split the sky, and thunder rumbled, echoing through the mountains. We huddled in our tents, hoping it would pass quickly. But the storm only grew stronger. The rain was relentless, pounding against our tents and turning the ground beneath us into a muddy quagmire. Suddenly, we heard a deafening roar. The small creek we had camped near had transformed into a raging torrent, fed by the unceasing rain. Water surged through our campsite, sweeping away anything not firmly anchored. Panic set in as we struggled to evacuate. The water was rising fast, swirling around our ankles then our knees. Mr. Harris shouted for us to move to higher ground, but the sound was lost in the cacophony of the storm. In the chaos, it was hard to see or hear anything clearly. The once familiar campsite became an alien landscape of rushing water and flailing figures. The floodwaters swept through with terrifying speed. I saw some of the younger boys struggling to stay upright, their terrified faces flashing in the intermittent lightning. Mr. Harris was trying to gather everyone, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm, but the currents were too strong. 3 boys, Jason, Tyler, and Michael, were caught in the surge. One moment they were there, and the next they were gone, swallowed by the churning water. Mr. Harris rushed to help them, but he too was pulled into the torrent. The rest of us watched in helpless horror, clinging to trees and rocks to avoid being swept away ourselves. Hours later, when the storm finally subsided, we were drenched, cold, and utterly shaken. The campsite was unrecognizable, a chaotic mess of debris and muddy water. We regrouped, calling out for our missing friends and leader, but there was no response. The reality of the tragedy began to sink in. Rescue teams arrived the next day, alerted by our frantic calls for help. They found the bodies of Jason, Tyler, Michael, and Mr. Harris downstream, where the floodwaters had deposited them. The grief that hit us was profound and overwhelming. The mountains, which had seemed so inviting and majestic, now felt hostile and cruel. The tragedy left a scar on all of us. The Uinta Mountains became a place of haunting memories rather than happy adventures. Yet, in the aftermath, we learned the harsh lesson of nature's unpredictability and the importance of being prepared for its wrath. We honored our friends and leader by continuing our scouting journey with a new respect for the wilderness and a commitment to safety above all else. In the fall of 2017, Emily and Mark set out for a weekend hike in Joshua Tree National Park. The park, with its rugged rock formations and stark desert beauty, was their favorite escape from the pressures of urban life. They were both experienced hikers, confident in their ability to navigate the park's trails and endure its harsh environment. The first day went as planned. They hiked for miles, marveling at the twisted Joshua trees and the vast expanse of desert stretching out in every direction. They set up camp as the sun began to set, enjoying the cool evening air and the brilliant display of stars overhead. The next morning, they packed up and continued their trek, aiming to reach a remote part of the park. The trail grew less defined, and the sun beat down relentlessly. By afternoon, the temperature had soared, and the oppressive heat made every step a struggle. They pressed on, determined to reach their destination. As the day wore on, they realized they were no longer on the trail. The landmarks they expected to see were nowhere in sight, and a creeping sense of dread began to settle in. They were lost in the vast, unforgiving desert. Their water supply was dwindling, and every attempt to reorient themselves only seemed to take them further into the maze of rocks and sand. Days passed in a blur of heat and exhaustion. Their water ran out, and dehydration set in, sapping their strength and clarity of mind. The desert, which had once seemed so majestic, now felt like a hostile, endless expanse. They scrawled a note on a scrap of paper, hoping it would be found if they didn't make it. Lost. Dehydrated. We tried. Their final moments were marked by desperation and a haunting sense of hopelessness. When their bodies were discovered weeks later, locked in an embrace beneath the scorching sun, the authorities ruled it a murder-suicide. The note suggested that they had lost their way and succumbed to the elements, but the exact circumstances of their deaths remained shrouded in mystery. Speculation ran rampant. Some believed that in their delirium, one had made the tragic decision to end their suffering. Others wondered if there had been a moment of panic or despair that led to the fatal act. The details of their last hours were lost to the desert, leaving only questions and sorrow in their wake. The story of Emily and Mark's disappearance and death cast a long shadow over Joshua Tree National Park. Hikers who once wandered the trails with carefree spirits now moved with caution and a deeper respect for the harsh desert environment. The park rangers increased their efforts to educate visitors about the dangers of dehydration and the importance of staying on marked trails. For those who knew Emily and Mark, the tragedy was a painful reminder of nature's unforgiving side. They remembered the couple as adventurous and full of life, and the loss felt all the more poignant because it was so avoidable. The embrace in which they were found spoke volumes about their bond, even in their final, desperate moments. Years later, the memory of their story lingers in the whispers of the desert wind and the shadows of the Joshua trees. It serves as a solemn warning to all who venture into the wilderness: respect the power of nature, and always be prepared for its challenges. Emily and Mark's tale remains a testament to the thin line between adventure and tragedy, a line that can be crossed in the blink of an eye when the desert sun is high and the way is lost. In the summer of 1980, my friends and I decided to spend a long weekend camping in Yosemite National Park. The park, with its towering cliffs, majestic waterfalls, and vast meadows, seemed the perfect place to unwind and enjoy nature. We set up our campsite in a secluded spot, eager to escape the crowds and fully immerse ourselves in the wilderness. The first day was idyllic. We hiked, swam in the cool streams, and marveled at the breathtaking views. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under a canopy of stars. The sounds of the forest, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, lulled us into a sense of peace and safety. On the second morning, while exploring the area around our campsite, I noticed something odd sticking out of the ground near a tree. It looked like a branch at first, but as I got closer, my heart began to race. It was unmistakably a human hand, partially unearthed and horrifyingly real. I called my friends over, and we stood there in shocked silence, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. We immediately reported the discovery to the park rangers. They arrived quickly, their faces grim as they examined the site. More rangers and forensic experts followed, cordoning off the area and instructing us to stay back. It wasn't long before they uncovered more skeletal remains of two women, buried in shallow graves. The realization that we had camped so close to such a gruesome sight sent chills down our spines. The investigation that followed revealed that the women had been murdered. The rangers worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence and searching for clues. The news spread rapidly, casting a dark shadow over Yosemite. The serenity of the park was shattered, replaced by a tense, uneasy atmosphere. Over the next few weeks, the authorities intensified their search for the killer. They warned campers and hikers to be vigilant, heightening security measures throughout the park. The discovery of the bodies linked to similar cases of missing persons in the area, pointing to a serial killer targeting those who sought solace in the wilderness. The breakthrough came when a hiker recognized a man who fit the description of a suspect seen near one of the previous crime scenes. The police apprehended him, and under questioning, he confessed to the murders. He was a disturbed individual who had been preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers for years, using the vast, isolated stretches of the park to his advantage. With the killer caught, a sense of relief washed over the park's visitors and staff, but the scars remained. The thought of such evil lurking in the midst of nature's beauty was hard to reconcile. For my friends and me, the experience left an indelible mark. Yosemite, once a symbol of tranquility and wonder, had become a place forever tinged with horror and loss. We continued to camp and explore nature, but the innocence of those adventures was gone. We learned to be more cautious, more aware of our surroundings. The joy of camping was now mingled with a vigilant respect for the unpredictability of both nature and humanity. Years later, I still think back to that summer. The beauty of Yosemite remains undeniable, but it serves as a reminder of the fragile line between peace and terror. The park, with its breathtaking landscapes, holds countless stories, some of awe and others, like ours, of darkness. Yet, in the end, it taught us the value of awareness and the importance of being prepared for the unknown, lessons we carry with us on every adventure. We arrived at Shenandoah National Park just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the dense forest. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine and earth filled our senses. My partner and I were excited for a weekend getaway, far from the noise and stress of city life. We set up our tent in a secluded spot, eager for a night under the stars. After a simple dinner by the campfire, we retreated to our tent, exhausted from the day's hike. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal animals. I found the silence comforting, a stark contrast to the constant hum of urban life. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a faint, rustling sound outside the tent. I lay still, straining to hear. It could have been a deer or some other harmless creature. But the noise persisted, growing louder and more deliberate. My heart began to race, and I nudged my partner awake. We both listened in silence, trying to make sense of the sounds. It wasn't long before we heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps, heavy and human. Anxiety gripped us. We hoped it was just another camper who had lost their way, but the steps circled our tent, slow and deliberate, as if whoever was out there was inspecting us. The footsteps stopped directly outside our tent flap. We held our breath, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, the fabric of our tent ripped open with a swift, violent slash. Moonlight flooded in, illuminating a man standing there, holding a knife. His face was shadowed, but his intent was clear and menacing. Instinct took over. We screamed as loud as we could, a desperate, primal cry for help. In the same instant, I grabbed our flashlight and shone it directly into his eyes. The sudden burst of light seemed to disorient him. He staggered back, cursing under his breath. My partner and I didn't waste a second. We continued to yell, making as much noise as possible. The man hesitated, then turned and fled into the woods. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by our ragged breathing. We scrambled out of the tent, adrenaline surging through our veins, and ran towards the nearest campsite where we had seen other campers earlier in the day. We reached their site, breathless and terrified. The campers there were startled by our sudden appearance, but quickly offered help when they saw the state we were in. We used their phone to call the park rangers, who arrived promptly and took our statement. The rangers conducted a thorough search of the area. They found evidence that the man had been lurking around other campsites, watching people as they slept. Thankfully, no one else was harmed, and the rangers increased patrols to ensure everyone's safety. We left Shenandoah the next morning, shaken but grateful to be unharmed. The incident left a deep scar, a reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even in the most serene settings. But it also highlighted the importance of staying alert and trusting our instincts. Back home, the comfort of our four walls felt more reassuring than ever. The beauty of nature had always called to us, but this experience made us more cautious, more prepared for the unpredictable. We continued to camp, but with a new respect for the wild and the unknown, always ready to protect each other from the shadows that lurked just beyond the campfire's glow.